Hello, hello, friends and family. You're listening to the Aligned Birth podcast. We've got a special treat today. This is our first attempt on our Riverside recording platform that we're using now with two guests and the host. So I'm one of the hosts of the show, Dr. Shannon. We have Maegan Hall on today. So she is our birth photographer, doula, and videographer. We had her on episode 115, and that was really talking about supporting birth and capturing memories. But we also have Emma on today. And Emma is a mother, and she is sharing her birth story with us today. And now we're talking about the healing powers and the healing impact that birth photography can have on us, not only to process that birth process, but looking into how we approach postpartum. And so Emma is a local psychotherapist specializing in complex trauma, attachment, and spirituality. So Emma wrote this beautiful blog, and Maegan supplied the birth photography with it. And so there's one quote from it that I want to share to kind of get us started into the show, because I don't know, Emma has a way with words. She definitely has a way with words. And so I want to share one little highlight of it here. And it says, "I was so scared to look at them, the birth pictures, and relive a birth that had gone so differently than I expected. There was some sort of implicit trauma and grief that existed for me that I thought would be triggered by the pictures. But thankfully, my experience was just the opposite. For me, my birth photos helped me piece together what happened in a way that had nothing to do with work." Welcome to the Aligned Birth podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon, a prenatal chiropractor.
And I'm Rachel, a birth doula and childbirth educator. Together, we're here to bring you conversations about pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. From cesarean to VBAC, hospital to home births, we've experienced it all. We are high school friends who reconnected through our shared passion for health and birth. As moms to two young boys, we've both changed careers after our own transformative childbirth experiences.
Join us as we discuss the importance of a healthy body and mind throughout pregnancy, birth, and into motherhood. Our goal is to provide fun, interesting, and helpful conversations and interviews that inspire learning. When your body, mind, and intuition are aligned, you can conquer anything.
Sit back and relax, or grab a notebook and take some notes, or maybe listen as you enjoy a walk. However you choose to listen, we hope you enjoy this episode of the Aligned Birth podcast. Before we get into the episode today, if you enjoy the content of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate your support in one of three ways. First, leave us a review or give us a 5-star rating. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and make a bigger impact. Second, you can sign up for our newsletter. By doing so, you'll be the first to receive new episodes and exclusive bonus resources straight to your inbox each week. Lastly, you can become a direct listener supporter. Running this podcast requires significant time, effort, and resources. Your contribution, no matter the amount, helps us continue providing valuable content to a wider audience. Simply use the links in the show notes to make your donation, sign up for our newsletter, or leave us a review. Every contribution matters and is sincerely appreciated. If the Aligned Birth podcast is a part of your weekly routine and you love what we are doing, please consider supporting us through one of these three options. Your support will create a ripple effect, allowing us to reach more listeners and make a lasting difference.
So welcome to the show today, Maegan and Emma.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. You have to remind me I have to say words because I keep thinking
you got to use words because it's not just video. I know. So we do have video with this. That's okay. Okay. So what I want to do with this is so Maegan was your doula and photographer for your birth, correct, Emma? So I would love for you to kind of, wherever you want to start that birth story, and wherever you kind of want to come into, like, I know, right? Where do we want to start?
Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing I want to name is that I do have a cold right now. So if I sound sniffly, it's not because I'm crying. It's because I have a
It's
cold.
okay if you cry, but yeah.
Though also, sometimes when you
Uh-huh.
talk about your labor, you can also cry. Okay. Yes. So
Was this your
yeah,
first birth?
this was my first birth. This
Okay.
was my first baby. I had a miscarriage previously before having this baby, but it was a very early miscarriage. So I had not been pregnant for very, very long. But yes, first birth experience. And I don't know, I'm so curious for Maegan to jump in and at any point, because I'm just kind of curious to tell the story along with you, because I know you had such a different perspective than I did, from having been, the doula and not the birthing person. But I like to be prepared for things. Part of how I was making sense of being pregnant. I had been very anxious about being pregnant, and my pregnancy actually went pretty well. And anyway, I had done a lot of research about birth. I listened to so many podcast episodes of women sharing their birth stories. And I just was ready. I was nervous and anxious, of course, but our hope was so we're working with Maegan, and we're also working with a midwife. And our hope, my husband and myself, was to give birth at home and do an unmedicated home birth. So we had prepared for that. We had gotten our birthing tub rented, and Maegan had talked through, the photography aspect and having twinkle lights strung up and things like that. And so we had prepared all of those things. I had sort of, I guess, what is it called? Prodromal labor pains a couple of days before. So when I started having contractions, it was maybe 4 a.m. on a Thursday morning, Wednesday night, Thursday morning. And I didn't know if they were actually going to continue or not, because previously they had they had ended up stopping. But I made note of them, and I was like, oh, okay, that's something. I'm definitely having some cramping, and I think these are contractions. And we actually had an appointment scheduled for that day to see our midwife. So we just kind of went on with the day like normal. And I also booked an appointment. Shout out to Chiropractic. I also booked an appointment to see my chiropractor that day. I was like, well, if I am in labor, I might as well see my freaking chiropractor.
And if it's stopping, that's always a kind of a like,
yes,
okay, let's see what's going on. Yeah.
And Maegan had suggested doing, gosh, all the words are escaping me now. It's been a year. Yeah, the mile circuit. I did the mile circuit like it was my job. And I will say this, that from everything I understand, my baby was in a wonderful position.
There we go.
But anyway, so I did all those things, and we went to see our midwife, whose name is Shoshana. And
I saw her in the pictures that you have, because I was like, I love Shoshana. She's amazing.
Do you know her? Yeah. Yeah. We went to see her, and I was like, I don't know. I still was kind of guarding myself. I'm like, I don't know if this is really happening or whatever. And she kind of just played it cool, and she was like, yeah, I mean, you're definitely contracting. And she told me later that after my husband, his name is Taylor, after Taylor and I left her office, she called her birthing assistant. She was like, hey, I'm just letting you know we're going to be at Emma's house tonight. Because she already knew. She was like, your contractions are actually pretty strong. So yeah, labor had started at 4 a.m, and then at 6 p.m. my water broke. And I called my midwife. She had said, obviously, call her if and when my water broke. I don't remember, Maegan, you will have to help me remember if at what point I reached out to you. I might have also told you when my water broke, and you were at another birth.
Yes. Yes, you were like, contracting, just so you know. And then I got the text, hey, my water broke. And I was like, I said a cuss word. And then I was like, okay, I'll make it. I just didn't want the baby coming flying out of you, but But
it was quite the opposite. So yes, my water broke. And then the next thing I remember, and obviously, my husband was actually gone. He had gone to run some errand of some kind when my water broke. But anyway, I started to notice that my water was kind of a weird color. And I was like, crap, that's meconium. And I sent pictures of it to my midwife, and she said, yeah, that's what that is. And in my mind, and I know that this can be different, maybe from different midwives or maybe even in different states and things like that. But my first thought was, oh no, I'm going to have to go to the hospital. I'm not going to be able to still do a home birth if I have meconium in my water. And what Shoshana said is, she said, if you were more comfortable with that, then yes, you can just go to the hospital. But she said, she said, we don't know how long it's been there. We don't know when the baby had its first poop. So, she said, we'll just monitor you and the baby extra closely. And that's kind of all we can do. And then if something seems like, the baby's in distress or something like that, then we go into the hospital. But so that was relieving for me, but I still was kind of like, oh, this is not, I had done my research. So anyway,
yeah.
At that point, let's see, sometime between 6 and 7. And Shoshana came pretty soon after that. She showed up probably within an hour or two. And all I think maybe by midnight-ish, which again, Maegan, you can help me a little bit with the timeline if you remember. My contractions were only a couple minutes apart, I think.
Yes.
And so
you told me, I remember I was like, hey, we were on the phone. I was in the parking lot at North Fulton. And I was like, okay, I'm just coming home from a birth. I can come to you now, or I can go home and go to sleep. And you were like, well, they're only 2 to 3 minutes apart. You should probably come. And I was like, okay. And so I just left the birth and went straight to you.
Yeah. So then everything was all going fine. We had the tub set up. I got in the tub. I think my midwife checked my dilation, and I asked her not to tell me what it was, but I think after the fact she told me. She did say you're more than halfway. I think I might have been like 6 or 7 centimeters dilated at that point. So that had happened fairly quickly for me to get over that hump. And so everybody was kind of thinking, okay, it's going to be sometime, at least from my perspective, everyone thought, okay, it's going to be sometime throughout the night or maybe early to mid-morning on Friday. And I got in the tub, and as I understand can happen, contractions slow down when you get in the tub, and that happened to me. And after some time, I got back out of the tub, and then we did anything and everything we could think of to try to get my contractions going again. I mean, Shoshana had all these crazy herbs and tinctures that she was having me take. I was listening to hypno birthing things. I was, I remember at one point, basically what ended up happening, maybe I'll preface and go ahead and say my labor ended up being 64 hours long. So I did not give birth until Saturday evening. So this was Friday. And so we spent all day Friday at home laboring. And at a certain point, I got up to 8.5 centimeters dilated. And then I guess I just never was really able to get into transition the way that I needed to. Sometimes it seemed like maybe I was close. We did the castor oil trick thing too, which didn't help. I mean, maybe a little bit. It just didn't do what it needed to do, but it did make me have to go to the bathroom a ton, which was also wildly uncomfortable. And so Friday was just a daze. And people were taking turns. I mean, everyone was just sleeping, and there were times where Shoshana said, I almost filmed you snoring between contractions so you knew that you were actually sleeping. Because at this point, I mean, I hadn't even, at 4 a.m. on Thursday, I was nervous, I was excited. I did not. And I was trying to sleep on Thursday, but I was too excited. So I had not slept in a long time. I mean, I was just trying everything. And my poor husband was just like, what is happening? Why? What? I don't understand. And early Saturday morning, Friday night, maybe at like 5 a.m., Shoshana had come in to check me, or, she had been doing these frequent checks and whatever, not cervical checks, but
Heart
whatever
tones.
the heck. Huh?
Heart tones?
Yeah. Heart tones. And she and I were the only ones awake at that point. And I remember she said, do you want me to check you again? And I was like, yes, please. I'm like, God, I've been laboring all day. and she checked me again and she said, there's been no change. And I was just like,
it's defeating.
I don't know what else to do. And so she said, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I think I need to go to the hospital. Like, and my thought at this point was, I need sleep. I can't push a baby out of me if I haven't slept. And so we woke up Maegan, and then I think my husband was still asleep at that point. And Shoshana's assistant, we also got up and she came in. So we're all kind of gathered around on my bed. And I remember, Maegan, you saying, what do you want to do? How do you feel? What do you think? And you seemed very, if you want to stay here, you can stay here. If you want to go to the hospital, you can go. And this was the first point that Shoshana had actually said anything one way or the other. But she said, I looked at her and I said, what do you think? And she said, I think you need Pitocin. So, and that I remember felt so relieving. It felt validating, maybe, because what I was already feeling was, I don't know, I think I need to go to the hospital. So to have her also say that, it was like, okay, this isn't like a failure on my part somehow. This isn't that I could be doing more. I mean, I was like walking around our neighborhood. I was taking like lunges up the steps from our basement to our, I was doing anything and everything I could think to do, and it just wasn't happening. So we woke up my husband and I told him, and we showered and we packed bags that I hadn't planned to, hadn't already had a pre-packed bag. And I will say it ended up timing wise working out well, because we got to the hospital around 6:30. So it was right before a shift change. We didn't hit any traffic on the way there, and Maegan came with us. And we were admitted, and I got an epidural and Pitocin, and then I slept, and we all slept. I think I probably slept longest. Maegan, I think you like slept out in your car in the parking garage.
Yes.
I know, like true birth worker here. Just where do we sleep? Oh my God.
Yeah. And then, so let's see, maybe around, this is where it gets even hazier for me in some ways.
As it does to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know exact timelines, but I think, let's see. So we got in the hospital around 6:30 in the morning. So I've been in labor for 2 days at that point. And they had me try pushing sometime in the afternoon, maybe around 12 or 2 or something. And how long did I push for? It was like, I think a couple hours.
Yes, because well, I don't want to say what you did, like, because I'll see what you share. But yes, it was a few hours. You were very tired.
What? I want to know.
You're like, what did I do?
Yeah.
And you did this, and you're going to go, Maegan. Like, so yes, you tell your part and I will go off. But yes, you pushed for a couple hours and you were very tired. You did not want to do it anymore.
Yeah, I did. I got angry. And they were having me push in all these different positions. And I remember there were certain positions, and there's a couple photos of this too, where there's a position that I was in where I was kind of like sitting there like this. And I remember I was like, oh, I was pissed in that moment.
You're like, I know what I was thinking there.
Like that position. I didn't. And I felt just, I wasn't doing anything. And everyone kept saying, let us know when you feel the urge to poop. That's the feeling of that the baby's, and I was
engaged.
Like, I don't feel that. I don't know. You guys are talking about this feeling and I don't know. So they said, okay, you know what? We're going to have you rest for a little bit longer. And we're going to have you rest in this very specific position that hopefully will get the baby, engaged and down and at the right station and all of those things. And so they had me propped up in a highly uncomfortable position on a peanut ball, and I rested. I don't remember how long it was that I rested in that position, but I do remember a couple things. I remember my epidural started wearing off, and I remember I started to feel the pressure of the baby. And I think, again, around that time, I spiked a fever, and I was this is the part, I would say, this might be the part that was the worst for me of all of it. And this is the part where I'll get emotional, is I just remember feeling at my wit's end. I was like, and I think I may be right about this in the blog post, that this was the moment for me that I had heard about. And I understand that for different women, this moment can arrive in a myriad of ways. But this was the moment for me that I came to the end of myself. It was like I had had all of these ideas about what labor could be like, and I slowly but surely was having to let go of them. You know, I wanted to do it at home, and I had made a decision to do it at the hospital. Even with my water breaking and having, you know, my water break so early in meconium, it's like you want these beautiful birth photos, and I'm walking around in an adult diaper for the entire time, and just I had mascara on, and 2 days in, I was like, I don't care what I look like anymore. And so, you know, whatever. And those things don't really matter that much to me personally, but there had just been all these things I'd had to let go of. And that was just another moment of it. Or even having an epidural, I had wanted it to be unmedicated and to make that decision. And we didn't even get to go to the hospital we really wanted to go to. We wanted to go to North Fulton, but they didn't have beds available. So we went to Wellstar instead, and it all turned out fine.
It was like all the things. Yeah.
All the things.
Literally letting go. But I love that you mentioned that, though, because it was literally, coming to that end of yourself. Yeah.
Of yourself. And so that was probably the most like Kairos moment of that for me, where I spiked that fever and just was, it's like that moment where you don't care if you live or die. And you're just like, I don't care about anything right now. I don't even know what's happening. So I had this fever, and I was probably also going through transition now that I think back, which was maybe also a piece of what and that was making me nervous. I was feeling very nauseous. I don't like being nauseous. And I was like, I don't like these feelings. What's going on? And then at this point, I still knew in the back of my mind, I'm going to have to push again. And that was the moment too, where I was like, I can't, I'm not going to be able to push. I could barely keep my eyes open. I could barely string words together. And I remember trying to get my husband to come over to me and basically saying, I need a C-section. I just was like, I cannot push this baby out. And at that point, the doctor came in. Yeah, maybe just the doctor, maybe the anesthesiologist also, but the doctor came in, and my husband said, hey, what if we did the C-section? And this doctor, I was so mad at him for it in the moment, but looking back, I'm actually very grateful to him. He said, you know, I'd really rather not do a C-section. And I know he had his reasons, and I think his reasons were predominantly the fact that I had been in labor for so long, and I had had meconium in my fluid, and now that I had had a fever, they were like, well, you might have an infection of some kind. And so we don't want to have to cut you open if we can help it. So he said, you know what? I want to try with the original plan. I want you to push again, and we're going to use a vacuum assist. And if that doesn't work, I remember him saying this too, if that doesn't work, we're just going to have to go in and push the baby back up your birth canal, and then we'll take you in for a C-section. And I'm just like, okay. And at this point, we were coming up on another shift change. I mean, it had been another almost 12 hours. And I remember a couple of nurses coming in being like, you're still here? And I was like, never
Don't
say that
ever say that
to a birthing woman.
Yeah.
But yeah, so at that point, then I started pushing again. And do you remember at that point, Maegan, how long I pushed?
Well, you had a vacuum assist, so it wasn't that
long. It wasn't that long. I think it was only like maybe 30 or 45 minutes.
I was thinking 45, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And they used the vacuum assist, and I remember they only had 3 tries, and I think they might have used all 3. They at least used 2 of them.
Yes. I don't know. Well, if you would have the 3rd pop off, your C-section.
Then your C-section.
That means you only had 2 pop offs.
Yes. Worked on the 3rd. 3rd time was the charm. And Yes, the baby was born. I was able to deliver her vaginally. I delivered her with that vacuum assist, and it was a massive letdown, if I'm honest. And I can see this looking back at the pictures too. I did not, if I'm totally honest, I did not care about that baby when she came out of me. I obviously wanted her to be okay, and I wanted her to be safe and healthy, but I did not feel afterglow. I did not I did not have that, I'm just, golden hour, whatever they call it. Also, she came out and she almost had to go to the NICU. She had a lot of fluid in her lungs and things like that. So they put her on top of me for just a second. And I had wanted the umbilical cord to get to stay connected for a little bit, before they cut it. And because she was in distress, they had to immediately cut it, which again, at that point, I did not care.
You're like, I've surrendered everything.
I've surrendered everything. And they brought her over to whatever table. Oh, and the other thing is that this was a shift change. She was born at 7:46 p.m. So they were like in the middle of a shift change. And I remember Maegan being like, here's our birth plan. We, telling them we want as few people in the room as possible. And I mean, the room was jam packed with so many people.
No, it wasn't like the baby was handled just fine with the tiny little NICU team, but it was like your previous nurse liked you, and she also liked being on photos, so she didn't want to leave. Then there was a training nurse, and you had 3 OBs between your knees, and they were using it as a training experience. And yes, I was like, and you were so checked out. I didn't want that for you, but I also was happy because I kept looking at you being like, are you okay with the party that is happening?
I didn't give a crap.
Here, and you didn't care. I was fuming. I was just like, nothing we've asked for is happening right now. Because I remember there was one point I was trying to get photos and I couldn't because there were so many people around you that were just standing there observing as you were an educational resource. And I just was like, we should, if you can clip in or whatever, there's a photo literally where she's meeting her baby and I'm trying to get it. And I'm like shooting between someone's arms, because I was her doula and had no room around her because she was bombarded with people.
Random people.
That just it was weird. But I'm glad you don't mind. When I think about it, I'm like,
yeah, on principle, I'm like, yeah, that's stupid. But it did not make a difference to me in the moment. I really, I just didn't care. So, and I remember also, Maegan, you came over to me and you said, hey, I'm letting you know. I remember looking over. The other thing was I tore pretty badly, which is not surprising considering I had also just gotten a fresh epidural because it had been wearing off. So, I had the fresh epidural and had the vacuum assist. So I tore badly and they spent a long time stitching me up. Not to mention the doctor was using it as a teaching opportunity for the residents of stitching me.
Which I will interrupt you and say,
yeah,
this is how hard it was. So normally for the people listening, your baby's placed on your chest. You're like, oh my God, love, bliss. And then at some point you deliver the placenta and then they check you for tearing. It's a very quiet process. It's hey, you're going to maybe feel a stick. Well, you had an epidural, so you wouldn't have felt it. I'm going to go ahead and repair your stitches or repair your tear with stitches. Here's what we're looking at, whatever degree. There's a small conversation. And then it's like, just focus on your baby. I'll be down here doing my thing. Well, the main OB had 2 other OBs on his side. So the entire moment when baby should be hearing only mom and dad's voice, all I heard was the OB saying, okay, so here's what we're going to do. You have this, it was a whole educational experience talking in these very sacred, precious moments of just the first few whatevers of meeting baby. And he just was teaching a full-blown class on how to get stitches to the side OBs in training. And it was just like the audacity, the injustice. I just cried. I think I cried more than she did at this time. Her crying came later, I'm sure, but yes, but she was just like, I don't care.
You came over to me and you said, hey, I'm just letting you know. Because again, they had taken, my daughter's name is Josie. They had taken Josie over to, with the respirator, whatever the heck they call it. The warmer. Yes. And they had, they were, working on her and trying to give, and she was breathing. That was the other thing I remember. I kept looking over and I could see my husband was over there with them at the warming table. And I just kept looking at his face to try to figure out, because she wasn't really crying. She wasn't really making a lot of noise. And so I'm trying to figure out, is she okay? And I was gauging it off of his face. He did not look concerned. So I was like, okay, they've got it. It's probably fine. And then Maegan, and he would come back over every so often, but Maegan, you were good about coming over and explaining, here's what's happening, here's what they're doing. And at one point you said, I'm just letting you know they may end up having to take her to the NICU, not for very long, but just to give her some breathing treatments or something like that. And I remember looking at you and being like, I don't care. I mean, I remember the thought in my mind was, whatever, I'll at least be able to sleep. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just was
depleted in all manners.
Depleted in every way possible. And anyway, they didn't end up having, thankfully, to take her to the NICU. They were able to get her breathing she was fine. And so then at that point, they brought her over to me, and it was myself and Taylor and her. And then, and then, there's also, so that was, I mean, he finished stitching me up, God knows how long later. And then, I don't know, it's all really a blur after that. I mean, it was, again, none of the things that I had hoped for. I had wanted to be able to curl up in my own bed, and we were at a hospital. And, the other thing was that Maegan came up to me. And this is another important piece, I think, for birthing partners, because Maegan came up to me after Josie was born, and she said, just letting you know your husband's probably going to need therapy after this. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And
there was I'm sorry. I would like to let the viewers know that, yes, I have a cold, but yes, I'm also crying.
Yeah.
It's a moment where you were sleeping and I just kept crying, but I was holding it together. So water was just pouring out of my eyes. And I looked at your husband and we both were just this is not what we wanted. And he looked so scared. Because you are very strong and I'm not just saying that, you really are. And you were just so broken, and we just didn't know, so much had gone out of the window, and Kennestone didn't seem to be respecting many of our wishes. I just didn't know what was next. And we were just so tired. I cannot describe, I'm very good at holding it together. I lose it in the parking lot, but I could not keep it together at your birth. I didn't sob, but the water would not stop coming out of my eyes. But his face the whole time was just hurting, hurting, mourning what wasn't happening and mourning what was happening. It just, and then just watching you was hard. So he, yes, I thought he is carrying the weight of the world, and I don't think he knows how to process it. He doesn't even have anything to compare it to. He just has Gina's class and what was presented as this is the norm. And then watching it go, I'm sure there's also a security that whether we want to or not, we buy into when we hire a home birth midwife and a doula. We kind of feel okay, we've done all our things. We've checked our boxes. We're going to be somewhat taken care of. And those, even though I was present, I had no power there. So I'm sure he felt exceptionally vulnerable, but also felt like he needed to be strong. And I just watched because I mean, as a photographer, I know the muscles of the face. And so I can, and I feel things in my heart. I read and feel energies because I can tell, and it helps with photos because I'm okay, wiggle it out, and stuff like that. So I'm watching him just go milliseconds, all of these emotions. And it was and I watched him literally just swallow it down. Like and I thought, okay, this is going to come up. Like, so yes.
And he, I mean, a couple of things too. We thought we were giving birth on Friday night. So he was texting people and saying, hey, you know, so he's not only fielding, and I remember too, afterwards, a friend of mine said, yeah, we were all really worried. Like we thought that you had died or something, genuinely. And it's so funny. My response to that, I was angry. I was like, no, I could not have possibly been worried about what you guys were worried about in that moment. But I get it. I understand. But that was my husband having to field all of that and being at the hospital while I'm sleeping, trying to call parents. And, you know, we've got my best friends and my parents have my location. So for all they see, oh my gosh, she's at Wellstar right now. And they hadn't been given any information about what. So he was also having to field all of that stuff, and I try to be strong for me, but it was traumatic for him in a different way. And I would say arguably more traumatic because he was more aware of what was happening and having to watch me go through it. Whereas for me, it was just, I was so outside of myself at some of the worst parts
That's
of
exactly it. You're so, it's that otherworldly view where you're just in that kind of a little bit of survival mode, but that partner they're not going through quite what you're going through, but then they see it all. So they experience it completely differently. So yeah. Now, how does because you were obviously a psychotherapist before becoming pregnant and that sort of thing. Do you think that your education, your work, your line of work, do you think that plays a part into how you were processing things as it was happening or even after the fact?
As it was happening, I'm not sure. And maybe it would be hard to know because some of it is so, I think so much of, for me personally, being a therapist, it's just sort of, there are pieces of it that I obviously turn on and off, right? When I'm with a client versus when I'm just at home and with friends and things like that. But really a lot of it is sort of just it has shifted the way that I view people and the world and things like that. So I think, I'm sure it probably did inform how I was processing at the time. But certainly it did afterwards.
Yeah.
And actually a big piece of that, I think I had known, I was somebody who prior to having, and actually I want to name this piece too, in case anybody who listens to this might relate to this. I was somebody who was never super gung-ho about becoming a mom. It was a slow burn for me to realize I was never really anti-kid, but I was never, oh gosh, baby crazy, just loved the idea of pregnancy and whatever else. So for me, it was a slow burn of realizing, oh, I think I'm ready. Oh, I'm starting to feel a longing. This is new. This is different for me. And then I had the miscarriage, and then the longing became even more pronounced. And it felt like a sign from the universe in many ways to kind of help me be more and more ready and know it was what I wanted, though it was very, painful and hard. But that when I became pregnant with Josie, I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt, okay, this is what I want. But I was also so nervous about losing control of my body through pregnancy, losing control of my body through birth, and not even in terms of how it looked. I mean, maybe a little bit of that, but for me, just I carry a lot of my personal anxiety somatically in my body. And so anyway, so I had been nervous about all of those things. And when I was in labor and it was just taking forever at home for no apparent reason, because it seemed like the baby was in a good position and I was doing all the things right, what everyone kept asking me was, are you sure there's nothing emotional holding you back? And I mean, I was like, I'm terrified to become a mom. But is everybody not like kind of scared of actually what this means and giving birth? I mean, is that really going to keep a baby inside me? And, I don't know why my labor ended up being the way that it was, but I do look back on it now, and if and when I have my second child, which I would like to, I mean, I don't have control over whether it will actually happen or not. I think about, there will be a lot to process then. There will be a lot to process going into doing this a second time, and then the decisions that we make about, are we going to even try for a home birth again? Are we just going to do hospital? Am I going to just maybe, I don't know. But all that to say, I think I walked away from it feeling so, there was this question in my mind, though everybody kept telling me this wasn't true, that there has been this part of me that had felt like maybe I had failed somehow, and that maybe the problem was that I didn't want it badly enough. I wasn't excited enough for her to be coming out of me, and that's why she hadn't come out. And I couldn't say for sure even now if that's what it is, but I do even now sometimes feel this sense. I mean, I love her so much, and I look at her and I think, if I had known, maybe it would have been shorter. Like, maybe I could have gotten you out faster. So that's been a layer of the processing too. It's like all these pieces that there's just still so many unanswered questions, and always kind of will be. And I remember, Maegan, when you came over to do your home visit after the birth, and you had said, there's a lot that we don't know. And you said second births often clarify first births. And so it will be interesting to see, if and when I have a second child, does it feel very different? Is there a different level of excitement, or is there a level of just a completely different kind of anxiety after this labor to do it again? I don't know. I feel like I've only ever heard women talk about, oh, so excited my baby's coming, whether it was, I'm so ready to not be pregnant anymore, or like I want to meet my baby. And just to normalize, like, that was not my experience. It came later. And I didn't also, I mean, I'm grateful I really didn't have postpartum depression or things like that. I'm sorry. I didn't have postpartum depression or things like that. I was actually able to bond with my baby pretty quickly. But the other piece too, I'm sorry if I'm rambling, is that then, because I had been in labor in so long and I had spiked a fever, they had diagnosed me with an amniotic infection. So they then kept us in the hospital for about 5 days.
I was about to ask how long. Yeah.
Yeah, I gave
Were
birth
you
to
there?
her. Yeah, I gave birth to her on Saturday, and I guess we came home on Wednesday.
Okay.
And and that was because she had slightly elevated, some protein was like elevated in some tests that they apparently normally don't even do, and they did. And she had no other signs of any kind of infection, but they made us do like a culture and wait, and then give her all these antibiotics, and they kept taking her away from us. And we were right next door to the nursery, and so we could hear her like screaming in there as they're trying to stick her and get blood drawn, and she had to have an IV port put in her head, so she had this ginormous thing on top of her head, and it was just like thing on thing on thing that we didn't want. And then at that point we were like, we want to go home, we think our baby's fine. But then we knew that if we went home and we discharged AMA, that insurance might not cover our stay. And so we were essentially trapped at the hospital. And
which is a lie, by the way.
Is it?
Just so you know, it's a common thing that hospitals use to scare parents to stay. There's no such thing as insurance not covering because you're MAA.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that's funny, because I used to work at a psych hospital, and they very much believed that was true there. But that might have been their way of scaring patients into staying there also.
Into staying too, yeah.
No, it's a common scare tactic, I think is what it's called.
Well, it's effective.
Because it's usually the nurses that tell you that. It's not like an insurance lady actually comes in to confirm.
Well, the nurses all were like, well, we don't know. I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
And then we had nurses who would say, well, I had women who had said, like, well, this is why we don't wait so long to come to the hospital after our water breaks. I mean, it was just like,
you were like,
also,
like, kick me while I'm down, please. Yeah.
I'm like, thank you. That's very helpful.
I think everything that you're saying, though, with the words and emotions and thoughts and feelings that you're using to describe how that felt after your first birth, like, it's all like, I mean, my first birth didn't go as well too. And I'm over here like tearing up too, because I'm like, I felt all of those things. Like that failure thing, could I have done something different? I too was like afraid. I was like, I think I had a lot of fear in that birth. So how did that fear hold it back, and how did that play a part? But I think it's beautiful that you mentioned that Maegan had said that second births often clarify the first births. And I know for me, that was very much so. Again, not always the case, but I'm thankful that you are expressing and sharing those words, because they're true. They're true to you, and they're true to a lot of people that go through birth, that this is not how I thought it was going to go.
Yeah.
And it needs to be, I don't know, it needs to be talked about in that safe space of not scaring other people and scare tactics with birth, but like, this was genuinely me, my thoughts, my feelings, and how I processed it, you know?
And that's the part, I think, where the birth photography comes in. And that quote that you shared at the very beginning of that, I don't remember how I put it. I think I'm probably far more eloquent in writing than in speaking, but I think that seeing the photos, so Maegan sent the photos, I don't know, a week later or something like that. And I remember you sent the link to them or whatever it was, and you said, open them when you are ready. And I got them and I cried. Hadn't even looked at them yet. Got the email, cried. And I was just like, I can't do it. I don't want to look at it. I don't know. And I thought initially, I'm not going to look at these for weeks. But I think it was only maybe the next day or something. It was not that long. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look at them. And as I was looking at them, it was so cathartic. I had, and this is where I think some of my trauma education, this goes back to the quote from the blog post of trauma. I know from my career, and I know from being a trauma therapist, trauma is stored in a part of the brain that doesn't have access to language. And it's like, I know that logically, but I'd been living it with Taylor, my husband, where we would just look at each other. I mean, I remember after the baby was born, we got wheeled into the recovery room or whatever it was, and we just looked at each other and we said, it feels like we just came out of battle together.
That was one of the other quotes I was going to read as well, too. That connection that you have with them, because I know when I read that, like reading your whole blog, I was just like, yes, these are the words I was trying to say all along. Like that's why it was so impactful and beautiful for me. I had the same exact thing, which I didn't expect for birth to feel like that.
And then how are you supposed to explain it to somebody else who wasn't there? And even my midwife she didn't get to be there for the last 12 hours of it. And I know she hated that, and Maegan was keeping her updated on things and whatever else, but it was me, Taylor, and Maegan, and who were there for the whole thing, and really just me and Taylor, because Maegan, wasn't there for the 4 or 5 days that we were there after the birth. And so, there was that piece, and that was all we knew to say to each other. And my poor husband too, I remember when he was first holding Josie in the hospital, he's looking at her and he was like, Emma, I'm going to be honest, I'm afraid I'm going to resent her for this. And then I watched him. I have like little photos on my phone. I was, in my bed, I could not walk for days. And the healing process is long. That's another piece of all of this. I mean, I'm still healing from the tears and all that stuff, and not to mention from the trauma, I think too. I went to see a pelvic floor PT this year, and she said, anatomically nothing is wrong. Like, your stitches are actually pretty good. She said, you're probably carrying quite a bit of trauma in your pelvic floor.
And you mentioned that somatically as well too. So yes, most definitely. It's so
all
real.
All of these different pieces. And so anyway, I went a little bit on the tangent in terms of the, I was going to say, when I saw Taylor holding the baby, I was like, oh, he's not going to resent her. it very quickly cleared away.
Had little
And same
heart
thing,
eyes.
yeah, and same thing for me, and thank God. But we do. I'm like, if I ever needed to hold this against her, I absolutely could. And I will say something that was kind of cool is that she was born on one of my good friends from high school's birthday. And he's Indian and his name is Naveen. And from what I understand, Naveen means new moon. And she was born on a new moon. So that was cool.
Oh, that's fun.
But I'm like, okay, that's fine. If you wanted to be born on a new moon, you could have just started coming, like the day before. So many days before. But yes, so when I saw the pictures, in terms of the trauma being stored in a part of the brain without language, it was like I felt that so clearly, this thing that I know in working with clients. But it was this moment where it was like it was touching on something in me that I, again, didn't even have words for or access to language around. And it helped with the timeline. The labor was so long that to see, you look through it, if you're looking at the photos chronologically, you see the lighting changing. It's night, and then it's day, and then it's night again. And then I'm in the hospital, and you see also me go. I see myself unraveling throughout the photos also. If I see the pictures of myself after she's born and then scroll back up to the photos at the beginning, I'm like, I look like two different people in some ways.
You're like, she had no clue,
So yeah, seeing the photos just felt so clarifying. And I was just so, I thought that I was having birth photos done to remember this special moment. And I will say, I still go back and look back on them every so often. And we just a couple days ago were at the anniversary of this labor, and my daughter turned 1 on Sunday. And
then we're doing this interview now. Oh my gosh. And it was crazy full moon. Oh my God. Sorry. We're going to throw all those things in there. Oh, that's very cathartic. Okay. Now I have chills.
Yeah. So anyway, looking at the photos, sometimes I look at the photos and I think, oh, that was special and that was sweet, whatever. Oh, this is nice. These are nice things. But the biggest thing for me personally, I thought that I was having photos taken so that I would have these, almost like you would have wedding pictures taken. It's this significant day and you want to look beautiful and have this special family moments. And for me, it was really more, it's just been a way to process and make sense of, and also too, for the people that I have chosen to share the photos with, and there's some on the blog post, but there's obviously far more total. It's also a way for me to kind of let them in on what it was like in a way that I never would have been able to describe to them. So that's maybe all I have for right now. Maegan, what are you thinking?
No, I think you were able to explain it perfectly. It is, and so I'm sitting here listening to us, and I'm realizing we're saying a lot without saying anything, because there's no real way for us to describe what it was like. And so as a birth worker, we listen to these types of podcasts or lessons and we go, okay, as a doula, what would I have done differently? As a doula, what can I learn from, sorry, this is not coming out of my mouth. And none of us pack tissues, I'm noticing. That was a doula mistake. But we listen to these things to learn. And I'm thinking to myself as we're talking, we're not really able to explain what it was like and why I was crying the whole time, why your husband was broken. Because just write it down on paper. You had a really long labor. We transferred. You had a vaginal delivery. We could simplify it down like that. It's so much more than that. It was the emotional roller coaster. I feel like that, and we could never explain that to someone but maybe with, like you were saying, with the visuals, we can just be like, do you see the difference in these two women? Like, this is where I came to the end of myself. This is when I honestly felt like giving up. This is when I didn't care about anything. And yes, that's normal in most births. We all have to come to the end of ourselves, but again, not over 60 something hours. And I was with you, I believe 42.
50. You were with me 50.
Okay, well, you're very gracious.
I think it was.
You're like, I feel like it was 40 something.
You said it was your second longest labor you've been a part of. That you have, I
do remember that. Because the number one was like 60 hours, but so that's the only thing I would add is just, it's really difficult to describe what it was minute by minute, the roller coaster, but the photos, you can look through them, or your words. There's nothing we could have done differently. We did it's just, even when you think of doing something, doing everything and it not working, the emotional aspect of that.
And the combination of having people say, you're so strong and oh, you're so strong. And even my husband, the way he was trying to make sense of it after was, well, you were so strong. You were so good at handling labor that you couldn't actually let her come out. And even that, it's this sort of double bind. And on the one hand, it's this compliment of, you're so strong. And on the other hand, that the message I'm hearing is, you were too strong. And so it's just this like, geez Louise, I mean, I can't win. The other thing I'll say too, this doesn't so much have to do with the pictures, but in terms of the processing of labors in general after the fact, I had 2 or 3 clients who were pregnant around the same time as me, who gave birth around the same time as me. I was actually the last of all of them. And one of them I haven't seen since she gave birth. She kind of just stopped doing therapy after she became a mom. But the other ones, they were both traumatic births also. And then I had a friend that I saw who he's a man, but his wife had given birth a month before I did. And I saw him maybe 5 or 6 months in both of our children's lives. And talking, what I've found is that it's like people do this thing. And I've found this to be true of both birthing partners and birthing people, where they immediately start to minimize what their experience was. That you do, you start to water it down. And I felt the need to do that too, right? Because how do you explain it to somebody? Like, you could sit here and say, well, it wasn't that traumatic of a birth because, I didn't have to have an emergency C-section. I mean, it's like, I just had to transfer and it was long. You're right, on paper. It's like, how do I explain to somebody what that would be like? And I found other people doing the same, where clearly it's just not something we talk about. And so there's this immediate attempt to try to make sense of it in a way that actually ends up minimizing and likely storing the trauma inside of us. That's not actually allowing it to be released. And so that has been the other piece for me, that to be able to offer women a platform to actually get to acknowledge how difficult their birthing experiences are when they are, because they're not always. And I mean, the other piece I genuinely do feel very passionate about, because of what my husband's experience is birthing partners. When I was talking to the friend who was a man, I said, so how did you guys' labor go? And he said, it was fine. And he starts telling me about it. And the more he's telling me about it, I was like, hey, that sounds really hard. And I remember him saying, I mean, it doesn't seem like it should have been that hard, but like it kind of was. And again,
that
I'm
right there,
here,
what you said, it doesn't seem like it should be that hard, but it was. So it was.
So it was.
So it was. Yeah.
And so that's where I think, what were we going to say?
I think that, I mean, I feel like I'm saying this and it's stupid because this is like your whole job, but I think people are not comfortable with grief in general. And so because they're not comfortable with other people's grief, they're not comfortable with their own. Because we're not comfortable with other people's grief, we think they can't hold the weight of our story. And like I said, on paper, it might look like your birth was okay. It was not ideal, but it wasn't the end of the world. But I think that there is a lot of weight in the world of long suffering. And that's what I feel like was difficult to watch and experience with your birth was, yes, it was long, but you were suffering. It doesn't matter how you were suffering. There was suffering, emotionally, physically, whatever. And that's enough. It doesn't have to be where we're like, and then you lost your leg. It doesn't have to be that. That's enough. It's enough to say, you don't have to understand exactly what I felt. I'm sorry that you're uncomfortable by my story, but I am happy that we're in a society that we are starting to talk more about suffering and grief and pain, particularly around the birth space. You touched base. I don't know if it was in our chat or in the blog post where, I feel like it was the blog post, but please, oh my gosh, I didn't sleep last night. Don't quote me on this. In the end, you were talking about how we needed to talk about it more. We need to talk about our births more. We need to support each other more in that. And that starts with, as you were saying, not minimizing it.
Yeah, it starts with making the choice to talk about it. And I mean, that speaks to so many aspects of how our culture just handles birth poorly. And supports postpartum so poorly, things like that. I mean, it's a much larger conversation, but I think to piggyback off of what you're saying about grief, there is also something called ambiguous grief. And the original place that I heard about it is with the idea of when people have loved ones who maybe go missing. And that there's never maybe a body found. There's no closure. There's nothing tangible. And I would argue in a way, I know that it's different, but I would argue that in a way, a difficult traumatic labor followed by a healthy child is another example of that. Because again, you come away from this incredibly devastating experience that then is so joyful and brings life, and your child is fine, and then you're just off to the races in parenthood.
And you're trying to balance that grief because you lost that birth that you had envisioned and hoped for and worked really hard for, but yet you also were experiencing this massive joy of this new life at the same time. So then you're balancing those emotions, but you're still mourning what you did lose. You did lose something.
And people don't want to hear that you're mourning when
but baby, you were healthy. Mom and baby were healthy. And it's like, I still lost something, I don't, that's tough. That's so tough.
Yeah.
Definitely still mourning.
So I think that I guess overall, I think there is such for somebody who really didn't care about birth or labor or things like that before I got pregnant, I'm so grateful to have gone through it, just simply to recognize, I don't know, just the beauty of the feminine and what even being a pregnant woman embodies in terms of just the divine feminine and this space that is this place inside of ourselves and this space that is so sacred. But within that, it is both the sacredness of the magic of what it is to bring life into the world, but also the sacredness that is the pain and the tenderness and the wounds that we can hold here in these very quiet places. And I just, it's something that, like you're saying, Maegan, we are starting to talk about it more. We're not talking about it nearly enough, even still. And we talk about pregnancy and birth as if it's just a breeze and no problem. And that's just that's something that doesn't leave us actually getting to live and walk in alignment with what's truly happening. And that in and of itself is a form of trauma, if that makes sense. Because what you're telling yourself is happening is different than what is actually happening. And it even if it's in subtle ways, can cause, and you'll see it come out. It's like being a pregnant woman, you're this lightning rod for women to tell you about their birthing experiences. And usually they're traumatic. And again, it's this other example of, wow, there's a lot that's being left unprocessed in us.
I was going to say, they need a space to process. We need a space to process it. Maybe not putting it on someone who is pregnant and trying to go through that journey.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely we need more of those spaces. Has this changed? I know you mentioned a little bit about how there were a couple of families you were working with that were pregnant at the same time as you, but has this changed or shaped anything with your therapy work and like the clients that you work with, or just how has this impacted you?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I have had a thought since having this experience, and I have been like, maybe I want to transition my practice into being maybe a little bit more for around the birth world. But I have also decided I don't really want to, I'm going to sit with that a while longer, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that really intentionally until after I'm done having children, because what I don't want is to be sitting here and holding all of these traumatic birth stories and then still have to continue giving birth myself. So that's more in the future, but it certainly has, there's so much of an intentionality when there's women in my practice who are pregnant or have had children recently or things like that, that I am able to hold space for. And I think in general, as a clinician, again, it's just one of those experiences that regardless of if it's anything to do with birth for the client, it's an expansion of the human experience and how we experience pain. And again, like it is, I've tried to be very intentional about how I've processed this and tended to this in myself since giving birth. And so my hope within that is that what it has done has actually made me, in general, a more whole person and a more maybe gracious or understanding, or that it has expanded my ability to hold space for people, whatever their trauma might be, particularly trauma that happens when we're adults as opposed to, childhood trauma, which is its own thing.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. You definitely have a way with words, my friend. You definitely do.
Thank you.
Well, we've got the blog, because Maegan had shared with me. I have the link there. I'm going to put that in the show notes. Highly, highly recommend our listeners go read it and look at the images that both of you so graciously, shared and put out there. It's so wonderful. Maegan, remind us where people can connect with you, like Facebook, Instagram. Who are you?
MeaganHall.com.
Maegan, M-A-E.
M-A-E. G-A-N. Yes. Maegan. Hall.com. And then that'll link to Instagram.
And all of your accounts. And I'm going to put it in the show notes too. And Emma, if you want to share your office, where you live, where people can connect with you, if that's something you want to share, we'd appreciate it.
I'm not going to share where I live because...
Well, no, yeah. I just mean like the area, Metro Atlanta.
Yeah, I live in Metro Atlanta, and my office is in Vinings, which is kind of in the midst of Smyrna, Buckhead, whatever. But I also do virtual sessions. And I don't have social media or things like that, but I think, let me check and make sure that what I'm saying is true. I think my website is emmacarterlpc.com. Yeah, it is.
Okay. I'll put that in the show notes too, so people can connect with you as well. So thank you so much. I think this might be one of an interview that I got the most out of. I don't know. I very deeply resonate with everything that you have said, Emma. So I really appreciate you being able to come on and being open and vulnerable and sharing this, because I know this is what we need. We need these processing of these stories and stuff. So, and again, Maegan, you're just awesome. You just rock. Thank you for taking all the pictures and doing all the things and supporting all the moms. So thank you so much. And tune in next week for a brand new episode. Thank you for joining us on the Aligned Birth Podcast. We hope you found our discussions informative, inspiring, and enjoyable. Remember, when your body, mind, and intuition are aligned, you have the power to overcome any challenge that comes your way. We appreciate your support and leaving a review or rating, signing up for our newsletter, or becoming a direct listener supporter. Your contribution helps us continue delivering valuable content and reaching more listeners like yourself. Stay connected with us through our newsletter to receive the latest episodes and bonuses straight to your inbox each week. You can also connect with us on Instagram at aligned_birth. All links can be found in the show notes. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of the birthing individuals and new moms. Thank you for being a part of our community. We look forward to sharing more empowering conversations on the Aligned Birth podcast. Until next time.